this feast still required in the dispersion? Deuteronomy 16:15 says to do it where the Lord ordains. I'm new to feasts and need advice on this one in particular due to the camping requirement. Okay, so this is a situation where you're supposed to, when there's an ordained temple, they would have encouraged everyone to meet in Jerusalem where that temple was, and they would camp out in the booths for the week because there's not enough actual place, there's not enough hotels for all the tribes in Israel to collectively gather. So they would just line the booths up in all the thoroughfares and all the streets and all the sides, even where there was a rooftops, anywhere there was a place. Because think about it, if the city has like on average 500,000 to 1 million people living in it on a regular day, during this 1 week, all the tribes have people coming in from all of Israel. And so you have an influx of like 20 times the population coming in, you know what I mean? And so they needed a place to stay. So this is why they were to basically be able to bring their own materials to put up their own tent and stay for the week, because there's literally no place to stay. So with that said, do we still do it? And you can practice it for sure. This is what we do with all the feasts. If you want to practice it, obviously there's no ordained temple. So all the requirements for the daily, bringing your atonement offerings forward and things like that, bringing your first fruits to the priesthood, that's not applicable because it's not here. We're in a prophesied time of dispersion, which is what is spoken of in Scripture. And so therefore, while we're in the land of the Bible technically calls it the land of the enemies, or while we're spread abroad throughout the nations of the earth, we can still practice these things. And if you want to go camping, that's up to you. You can practice this. We would encourage you to practice it to the best of your ability. But ultimately, this is a feast of booths, meaning that it's also called tabernacles or Sukkot, so that it's symbolic of what we'll experience to receive our house, our booth that's prepared for us by the Messiah when the kingdom comes. So it's a beautiful time. But what would you like to say on this, Pretty?
The reality is that none of us can keep any of these feasts to the letter while we're in the dispersion. So the question of the wording of the question with the word required in there, it's kind of hard to address what's required, because everything that's required, like Sean said, for the actual gathering itself, we're required to be going to Jerusalem for that, to an ordained temple. We're required to bring forth sacrifices for these feasts. So the things that we are required by Scripture to do, we can't physically do them. So what do we do in the absence of those things that are required for us to go do the requirements? We follow the example of Tobit, and we honor these feasts in the ways that we're able to while we're in the dispersion. So for some of us, that means we're able to go join with others and camp for a whole week with others in a big organized Sukkot gathering. Some people aren't able to do those things. Sean and I have ended up not being able to go do camping out where we live. It gets way cold and snows early in the year. But every day, where we would build a little sukkah outside in our driveway, we're honoring the tradition.
Our form of practicing.
Yeah, it's our form of practicing this particular feast. And then, of course, on the Sabbath days for that 7 days, the first and the seventh day are Sabbaths. We don't work on those days. We treat those like we would a Sabbath. So do things that you can do, but a lot of what we're required to do, we actually can't do. So we need to be honest about that, especially with our apologetics with Christians in the churches. We need to be honest about the fact that we can't literally keep a lot of the requirements of all these feasts pretty much. So we're keeping them in dispersion. We're honoring them. So however that looks for your family, it's going to look different from family to family. Not everyone's going to have the same thing on their plate for what they're serving for their feasts. Not everyone's going to decorate. Some people are going to get totally into it and decorate, Some people are going to organize gatherings on their land if they're able to do that. Some people aren't going to be able to do those kind of things. So it's in the dispersion, it is a little tricky as far as figuring out how to do things, because we're not necessarily raised with traditions for them like we were in Christianity, where we just knew what we did for Christmas and we just knew what we did for Easter or whatever. And so we're creating those traditions for our families now. It's new for a lot of us.
Well, I would encourage Mr. Kook, to go read Leviticus 23 specific, and you can cross compare that with Deuteronomy 16 and Numbers 29. And you can see there are some instructions as far as what they did. Also, if you go into the book of Jubilees, you can see Abraham, I think it's in Jubilees 17. Abraham is also keeping Sukkot on the earth. and he's synonymous with what's described in Leviticus 23, which is he would do it with joy. I want to stress that first and foremost before I say the rest. Okay, he would do it with joy. So these are not to be a burden. These should be joyful feasts, right? These are times that you participate with joy, okay? But every day he would take, when he was a priest, though. Remember, Abraham was a priest. There's a context there. You and I are not priests. But he, as he offered his sacrifice to Father, to God, as he prepared the meals for the sacrifice, he also would take branches from palm tree or other willowy branch trees in his area, and he would, sing and dance and, use them. So one year, a couple of years ago, Lindsay and I made some little
crowns
made out of branches, right?
That's something they do that's described in Jubilees, that Abraham and his household, they went and they pulled down leafy boughs and they made crowns from the leafy boughs. So for example, this is our little tradition that we wanted to start building on. I bought a faux vine thing that's for crafting, and then some faux golden leaves that are on a little vine, and we crafted these little crowns. And our plan is to add to them every year during Sukkot. We buy something else that we add to it, and that's just something we decided. It's just another way we can honor this part of the festivals. Another thing that we've decided we're going to do is we're going to have lamb for all of our feasts. We always get lamb. That's our special meat for the feast. But I'm going to be having Sean grill the lamb out over charcoals instead of, because a lot of times I'll cook them up on a skillet. Like that's my thing, the cast iron. And for me, that's kind of the only way to cook steaks. But we want to honor the concept of the priests cooking their offerings over flames. And so one of our traditions that we're starting is Sean, the man of the house, is going to be the one grilling the meat for our feasts. So just little things like that is how we personally try to honor these feasts while we are dispersed and unable to keep a lot of the letter.